It's really fun to be an assistant minister. I get to actually assist the minister. It's a cool thing. Reverend Sandy gets to do something else on a Sunday when Reverend Roger or Reverend John speaks. And that's important because being a minister is an intense commitment, a very demanding job. And the way you get a turbocharged minister is sometimes they get a chance to do something on a Sunday that otherwise being a minister would not allow to be possible. So it's fun. And I also get to assist you with sharing a little bit of some commentary and discussion, a bit that comes out of kind of the lessons of science of mind that hopefully will help all of us as we look to figure out where it is that we go deeper into being that person who can embrace all, who can open the way to a world that really fulfills the vision that we're all here about. And so how do I get to that? From a talk about the ultimate inside job. So what is an inside job? If you see a story about something that happens in government or business and nobody knows quite how it happens, it's an inside job. It wasn't transparent. You couldn't see exactly like how it happened, how did it go down, how did they accomplish it, but afterwards something happened. It was an inside job. There was a movie, the Italian Job, that's different than the inside job. Inside job is a little different. So what then about an inside job is that me? Am I making feedback? I'm good? Okay. It's how in the world of spirituality does this notion of inside job have relevance? And I would suggest that the way to get there is realizing that we're all showing up as human beings. I'm trusting that all the souls here are human beings, right? And then we also, as we get familiar with science of mind and go into this study, we get familiar with the idea that we're spiritual beings having the human experience. And my suggestion is that there's a way to think about this where we can look at some of the things that we do as a spiritual being are kind of an inside job. They're inside in a way that it's not some human business, it's spiritual business. We get to this spiritual point, a point of knowing, a point of connection, a point of recognition, a point of spiritual activation that then makes things change in the outside world, that opens us to doing things as humans, such as in the InSpirit community, that are transcendent, wonderful, exciting, and beautiful. So now the way that I'm going to try to get to that is by working with a song that came out in the 1980s called From a Distance. And I'm going to weave a little bit of the song into what I say. We're going to have some amazing performance just at the end of my talk where the band and Gretchen will be performing the song, and then we'll have a little bit of an affirmation and exchange about that. Because what I would like to suggest is that as we look at From a Distance in that song, we'll realize that distance is being used as a metaphor. And if you've been around Science of Mind and you've gone to any of the classes, anything like that, you might have bumped into metaphysics, and metaphors are over there kind of close to metaphysics, but they're not analogies. An analogy of someone swimming like they win the gold medal or something, you might say she swam like a dolphin. Analogy, swam like a dolphin. A metaphor would be more like the dove of peace, or the person was in a tough time and says the angels protected me, right? They're talking about something, and it's not that the angels actually flew down and took the bad guy away or something like that, but it's a metaphor for how things happen to get done. So I would suggest that when we talk about this, and when we talk about that distance, instead of thinking about how far, you think it's a metaphor for the right spiritual place, the spiritual activation that makes things possible. Okay, so I wanted to go back and forth a little bit. I've got a couple pieces here, and I've got more than I could actually honestly memorize. I'm good for science facts, but some of this other stuff I need a crib sheet to help me. So the song From a Distance comes from the 80s, and I've got some notes here from Performing Songwriter where Lydia Hutchinson interviewed Julie Gold, the author. And Julie talks about how she went to Manhattan in the late 70s 70s, she was just 22. And also think about time and how things happen over time, but life can be timeless, because that'll come up as well. So she talks about going to New York, and she's not able to make it as a songwriter. And how many of us know someone who went to New York for music or Broadway or something and worked at that, and now they're someplace else? It happens. It's part of the epic saga of human journeys that you can read about. And some people become Andrew Lloyd Webber. It happens. So she talks about then, after going out in the late 70s, it's the mid 80s, and she's working as a secretary at home box office. So she's kind of in the industry, but her job is a secretary at home box office. And she's having a tough time. Her parents want to encourage her. So they arranged to ship her childhood piano. Ship her piano, and I guess she's got enough room. She's got a one-piano apartment. The piano gets there, they bring it up, and the people who bring it say, you must let, and this is something that you could ask Reverend Kirk about. He would know, because we have pianos and amazing things come out of them. You have to let the piano rest after it goes through the experience of moving so that it can be settled and calm. So her piano is settled and calm, right? It's her 30th birthday, and so she sits down at the piano the next day, and she's been trying to do songwriting now for a long time, right? She's 30 years old, and what happens? From a distance comes out of her. It happens just like that. And so here's her comment in the interview. On one hand, it took me 2 hours to write. 2 hours to write a song from which I'll share a little bit, and we'll see how that works for us. On the other hand, it took me 30 years. 30 years. Her next comment, I love this. Pick whichever hand makes you happy. I love them both. So her journey, whether it was a 2-year journey or a 30-year journey, or the instant that she sat down when Spirit had something, a message that was ready to come to the world through Julie Gold from a distance. She also then talks about how, a little bit later on, as different people performed it, that, let's see, that was, just thinking about the time, 85. In 1988, she played from a distance with Nancy Griffith at Carnegie Hall. Wow. And then later on, Bette Midler crushed it and made the song quite famous, to the result of 1991, the Grammy for Song of the Year, From a Distance by Julie Gold. So just the arc through her life, and even from 85 to 88 to 91, to be recognized like that. And so she talks about now living in a condo in New York with her piano and her songwriting. But what touches her heart, apart from having felt the song in Braille, heard it in elevators, knowing that it's been played for astronauts in space, how she just regards it as a divine miracle and is so grateful. So what indeed could that be? And I'm going to go back and forth now between some little facts and thoughts and spiritual concepts and the lyrics here to kind of warm that up. And remember, when I say from a distance, I'm saying from being in that place, that moment, that activation, where our spiritual being is, we've allowed it into us, and we're dwelling in that, we're trusting it, we're feeling connected. From a distance, the world looks blue and green, and the snow-capped mountains white. From a distance, the ocean meets the stream, and the eagle takes to flight. From a distance, there is harmony, and it echoes through the land. It's the voice of hope, it's the voice of peace, it's the voice of every man. From a distance, we all have enough, and no one is in need. There are no guns, no bombs, and no disease, no hungry mouths to feed. So that distance, it's not like far away, it's not over there. It's not some zip code where I may or may not be allowed. It's when we're settled and open to the spiritual power within us, to the spiritual being that's in this human body, taking this life journey with us. In that time, in that moment, it's all possible. It all can be true. The world that embraces everyone is activated. And how do we do it? Each of us, an inside job. The ultimate inside job, I would suggest. So how about that inside job? And how do you get to that inside job? I would tell you that between 10 and 20 years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, I was at a conference, and they announced a special optional evening speaker. You could pay more money and attend this thing, and I looked, and it was some old guy, some Matthew Fox, who was going to speak, and you could pay more money to go after dinner and listen to some old guy speaking. And that was like about 15 years ago. I think he's older, and so am I. And I paid the money, and that night I can remember, I had a good meal. It was a beautiful day. I was up early. I had other work to do. Why bother to go? Why would I bother to go? Why bother? I could turn in early. I could get some work done. I could call home. I went. And this old guy stands up. And the next thing I know, he's teaching science of mind concepts like I've never heard before. How did he do that? And then his pathway to access that distance, that place, that activation, he says, let's go back to the first people. They knew how to dance, and they knew how to chant, and he had us dancing and chanting. And at the end, people were like feeling, the spiritual being within me is activated. I'm feeling radiant and connected. My life has shifted. So there's people out there that know how to do this. That what is that distance? That know how to cross to that point where the potential opens and the world is beautiful. They come in all ways, shapes, sizes. We do that together here for each other. And I think it's that same distance that he activated me that so long ago. And now why is that important? Why is that spiritual activation or connection important? There are actually some professors at Brigham Young University doing a study. And I think what they were studying was just about the same thing. But because they were doing science, they were looking at social networks. And social networks is a big thing. There's all the brouhaha, Facebook, yada yada, Twitter, yada yada. The social connection of people, so scientists can measure social connection. And they said that when people encounter some kind of a risk in life, and you think about maybe the person is obese and they get to this risk in life, or maybe they've had a sedentary life and they haven't exercised and kept themselves healthy, strong, even buff, who knows. And then it says the study shows that if they have a spiritual network, even if they've ignored all the other things about healthy living, if they have a social network which they can measure, they have 50% better odds of survival. 50% better if they have a better social network. And I would just suggest, as we think about this, that you consider that what the scientists haven't yet figured out how to measure is the person spiritually activated? Are they spiritually connected? Because indeed, what did Ernest Holmes have to say about that? He commented that a silent communication takes place at all times between friends on the subjective side of life. As he was developing science of mind, he got it, that having that spiritual activation, that subjective connection is powerful. And he did that, when was it? 1920s. No internet, no Twitter, no Facebook. He's talking about powerful connection, network between people. Okay, I wanted to say a little bit more. So now we've got a little dial in on what distance is, and we'll say just a little bit more about that. From the words of Julie Gold. From a distance, you look like my friend, even though we are at war. From a distance, I just cannot comprehend what all this fighting is for. From a distance, there is harmony, and it echoes through the land. And it's the hope of hopes, it's the love of loves, it's the heart of every man. Again, that doesn't mean from far away. That means standing in our spiritual being, saying yes to our divinity and our potential. And even the same thing emerges, if you will, in the Bible. I was looking in Colossians, and even though I've just finished quite a lot of study for Holmes Institute, I had to do a little more research. Colossians, did they build the Colosseums? No, there's some other people. And Paul was writing them a letter because they were off track. They were wandering a bit. And he wanted to encourage them to come back to the deeper truth, what was behind the emerging church at that time. So in chapter 3, verses 12 to 14, Paul writes, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly beloved, clothe yourselves in compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." And when you listen to what the great teachers are saying, what's been known to humankind and passed down to help us through the ages, it kind of all converges and comes together, I think, in a pretty special way. When I was growing up, I had some experience playing the clarinet, and I mess around with stuff like that a little bit for fun. And I'll tell you these words when I first heard "from a distance." I didn't know about distance and metaphor, and that wasn't on my mind, but this hit me hard when she wrote, "From a distance, we are instruments marching in a common band, playing songs of hope, songs of peace. They are the songs of every man. God is watching us. God is watching us. God is watching us from a distance." So at the time, I thought, well, God is, okay, yep, God's out there over the next hill, up in the clouds in some other universe. It didn't occur to me that the distance from which God was watching me was like right inside. It's an inside job, folks, an inside job. So I would, before we go on and listen to the song, I would just like to give you this one thing. There's a kind of a silly comment about the three kinds of people. Maybe you're familiar with this. The ones who learn by reading. I grew up as that guy. If I got near a library, I would eat the library visually, digest it, master the library. There's those who learn by observation. There's people who watch. I've been there watching, observing. And then the rest of them who have to touch the fire to learn it's hot. So I think the thing about from a distance, God is watching us and our ability to behold everybody as a friend. And it's not automatic. There's people out there that I can name today that I don't regard as friend yet. That potential, that's the magic. Listen to the magic. It's not about how far, it's a metaphor. I'd like you to join me now in just a short responsive reading as we start to conclude my talk about this ultimate inside job. So I'm going to say the line and ask you to just say it back. From any distance, there is harmony. We all have enough. We are instruments. Marching in a common band. And you look like my friend. And now, just to put the icing on the cake, I'd ask you to turn to a neighbor. And if you're online, just speak into the monitor. We're all here together virtually. And just say to someone, from any distance, you look like my friend. And if you haven't, respond back. From any distance, you look like my friend, because truly you do.